Hello friends, and welcome once again to this edition of a Walk in the Garden Bible study. This is part 10 of our study of Genesis chapter 4. And if you remember from our last lesson, we were leaving off of verse 22 of chapter 4, and we had been noticing how now Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, how he had been dismissed from the presence of the Lord, and he went out and he planted himself out on the east of Eden. And we notice there that he was dwelling in the land of Nod, and then eventually we saw some of the lineage of Cain. We noticed that he took a family, had children, great-grandchildren, grandchildren, and we saw how the lineage of Cain had carried down, and we noticed that even he had built the very first city, the very first part of civilization that would come into existence in the form of a city, and he named the city Enoch after one of his sons. And so we see now for the very first time the initiation of civilization, and of I guess you'd call it the modern civilization at that time of, formulating a dwelling place and a community of people, now that there was actually a population on the earth. And when you think about it, we were discussing how the population could have been around 7,800 people at this time. And that was a massive amount of population at that time because all they had ever known was their immediate family, and they were the very first family to exist. And so we had been studying about some of the descendants of Cain, and where we left off last time we were talking about Lamech, and how Lamech had taken unto himself two wives, Adah and Zillah, and we were noticing some of the children of Adah. And it was in these two sons that she had that they would formulate some of the very first career paths and some of the very first occupations. And it even calls them the father of them. So they were the head, they were the initiator of these career paths. And they had to get them established, they had to, organize them and conduct business in that sense, and to be able to pass that on to those that would take up the helm or take up the reins of the business, following their leadership. So they were the very first. And the one we had discussed already last time was Jabal, and we noticed that he was the father of such as dwell in tents, just as the nomads do even today in the Middle East. We see them going from place to place, and basically they have their mobile houses in the form of tents. And so he was the father of such as dwell in tents and of all that have cattle. So we notice that he was a shepherd, he was a rancher, and he was a livestock raiser. And then we were next going to look at his brother Jubal. And the Bible tells us that Jubal, who's the brother of Jabal, is the father of all of such as handle the harp and organ. So he was a musician. And so here we are, even at these very early times in the earth's civilization process, we see that music is now coming on the scene. And music, of course, we know gets used in just almost every facet of life today. I mean, when you think about it, you can't go into a department store without hearing music playing. You go to the dentist office, you're going to hear music playing. You get in an elevator, you're going to hear music playing. You go to the gym, people have all their headsets and their earphones and so forth listening to their music. Sometimes you pull in the gas station, you hear the car next to you, and you can very prominently hear their music playing. But music has a definite just place in mankind, and it goes all the way back to our roots. And we see the initiator of music here is through this son called Jubal. And he was a musician by trade, a musician by nature, and a musician by calling. This was the call that God had put on his life, was to be a musician, just as he had done to his brother Jabal, in having the talents and the abilities and the desire to be a husbandryman. And so this was his calling. And so Jubal had innate musical abilities. And you say, well, how can that be? How can he just instantly have the sense of, well, how is it today when you see what we call a musical prodigy, and here you have a 2 or 3 year old child that doesn't have to even be taught music. They just instantly can pick up a piano or a guitar or whatever the case may be, and just almost by ear or by just natural sense and natural innate sense to start playing music. And you think about the life of Mozart, for instance, and how he started at such a young age, but he had the innate talent and ability. And how well known was he? Well, even they're even playing his music today, this 300 or 400 years later, and he's still considered one of the greatest composers that ever lived. And so some kids, some children, some as they grow, they just have a natural sense of musical capability. And so this was what Jubal had. And so he had worked on developing some early form of instruments, and obviously from the available resources that they had available at that time. And what did he do? He crafted them into finely shaped and tuned and what I would call emitters of sound. He tuned them for their sound quality and their range and variance of notes. And on top of that, he was the original composer, because there was nobody to follow after. He couldn't go down to the local store and pick up some sheet music. I mean, there was no music in existence at that time as far as we know. So he had to initiate his own music. He had to compose his own music. And of course, if they composed music that had words to it, then they would compose the entire songs themselves. And so he had the lead, and he was the head of such matters. And he is known as the father of those who would follow. And then thirdly, we see that the Bible is going to tell us the descendants from the other of Lamech's wives, and that was his wife Zillah. And we're made aware that of at least two children of Zillah's. We see Tubal-Cain, and then we see his sister mentioned, Naamah. And Tubal-Cain acquired a distinctly different occupation and became what we would know as a smith. He was a metal worker. He was a metallurgist. So again, it's just fascinating because, people today, scientists today, archaeologists, whatever, they always try to write these history accounts and try to figure out when all these things came to be in the first place, when did they come to pass, and how were they, built upon to get us where we are today. Well, here's where they had their roots. They had their roots even at this early point in human history. And so we see that Tubal-Cain is a metal worker. He has the emphasis placed on such materials as brass and iron. These were two materials that they had discovered. They were readily available in their area, and they had found ways that they could, make things out of them. They found out that with the addition of fire, they could melt the materials. They could, maybe make forms in the rocks or in the, the sand or whatever they had available at that time, and they could formulate different shapes and different designs and come out with some, instruments, or come out with some different types of tools that they could use. So they had a metal worker in town, and his name was Tubal-Cain. And you think of metal shops today where they fabricate things out of metals. They've got all this technology now where they can, use all manner of metals. I mean, you got titanium, you got platinum, you got tin, you got steel. I mean, there's so many different types of metals that they can use. There's metal alloys that have distinct properties about them. Some are made that they won't rust. Some are made that because they have a stronger bond or a stronger bendable capability. And so there's all these different types of metals that we've learned to use through the years. But it seems to be that the first metals that were used were brass and iron. And these were two of the distinctive, highly popular metals of the day. He could devise them into farm implements, cookware, storage units, ornaments, and even weaponry. I mean, there's so many variety of devices that he could be making out of these metal products. And so he would be a highly sought after and needed. And notice, rather than calling him the father of his specialty, rather the Bible refers to him as an instructor. He was charged with passing on his line of expertise and instructing those who would follow. And so it is that in the lineage of Cain, we are at present noticing the the one distinctive that we're noticing is the absence of worship. You know, before in some of the scriptures prior, we saw that, you know, one of the basic, evident, and prominent things of their daily activities or weekly activities was their worship and their association with God. You know, he made his daily walk through the garden with Adam and Eve, and then, you know, with the boys there, that, you know, out, you know, God was interacting with them, and they would come and bring their offerings to him. But so far with Cain and all of these generations that were following, we do not notice any form of worship taking place whatsoever. The Bible is totally silent on this matter. And so even though their talents were ingenious and industrious, it seems that they were going to be used solely for the things of this earth. They were not going to be used in the worship of God. And so we see a father of shepherds and a father of musicians, but no father of the faithful to be found. Not in the land of Nod, not in the land of Cain, and seemingly no one to pass on or familiarize anyone with the good knowledge of the Lord. And you know, what do we have today? We have cities, we have countries, we have whole nations that basically have no knowledge of God, because they have somewhere in their historical background, at some point, they had made a decision to turn away from the Creator, to turn away from their Heavenly Father. And really, this right here is where it all began. You know, some people say, well, you're trying to tell me that these whole countries are wrong, that they're not worshiping properly, they're worshiping false gods, or that they're all going to die and go to hell. You know, some people have a tough time conceiving that and believing it. And because it's something that we don't want to believe. We don't want to conceive that. But here we see that it had its roots even at this early point in human history. And as a result, there were many groups of people that would take this same type of behavior with them wherever they migrated to, wherever they started their land or their population centers, and they would take the ignorance of God with them everywhere they went. And so this is one thing to keep in the forefronts of our minds, that even those who are destitute of the knowledge and grace of God, they may be endued with man excellent and useful accomplishments. And so we should be reminded that the common gifts are still given to bad men, while God chooses to himself the foolish things of the world. You know, the Bible tells us that the preaching of the cross to them that perish is foolishness, but to those of us that are saved, it is the power of God unto salvation. So, you know, we see the difference there in, you know, what man would consider great and mighty things, you know, the God of this world, compared to what God pronounces that are great and mighty things. And so there's a distinct difference, you know. And so we're going to move on today, and we're going to pick it up where we're leaving off there in verse 23 and 24. And we see the Bible says, "And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold." So now we have another event that's coming before us. We have another incident, you might say. And we see that, you know, here's Lamech coming home one day from, you know, whether he's been out working or whether he's been out communicating with other people or associating with the community, whatever the case is. He comes home to his wives and he has a major announcement that he's going to make. And it's a strong announcement, and he wants to get their attention, have their undivided attention. And it's almost as if the emphasis is, you know, that don't pronounce judgment on me, don't have any negativity towards me, but I'm going to tell you like it is, and you're going to take it, and you're just going to be silent about it, and, you know, kind of, for lack of a better term, you're going to suck it up and deal with it. So that's kind of the emphasis that he's given when he makes this kind of bold statement, and he says, hearken unto my speech. Listen to me. And listen closely, because I'm going to tell you something that is of great, could be of grave consequence. And what is it? Well, he has rose up a man, and or rose up against a man, and he has murdered him. He's killed him. He says he's slain a man to his wounding. So here we have, what do we have? We have further dissension, as we see Cain's lineage seems to be holding true to form in the way of Cain. Cain was a murderer, and now we see that one of his descendants is going to follow suit and become a murderer as well. And so what is this statement? Well, first of all, we see that we've already noted that, Lamech wasn't living for the Lord, and in fact, he blatantly broke and violated one of the premier laws of God, and that was the one flesh principle. And when you think about this one flesh principle, why is it such a major deal? Why do we still have laws today that have carried over that will only allow, a man to have one wife? Well, the Bible told us that Adam and Eve, when God formed Adam from the earth, and he brought Eve unto him and made her from his rib, he said that she would be a helpmeet for him. She would be acceptable to him in the fact that she would be his completer. That's why she was taken from the rib of Adam, is because when they came together, she would be his completer. Well, if you have a completer, then that means you're complete. So it's kind of like if you had a jigsaw puzzle, and you put the entire puzzle together, and then you try to get another piece from another puzzle and put it, there's nowhere else to put it, because the puzzle's already complete. There's no, and if you try to force it in there and cram it in there, then there's going to be a problem. It's going to result in bad things. And so we see that Lamech had already violated this principle of God that was instituted by God for the behalf of mankind. Secondly, we see that it appears here that he doesn't treat his wives too good, because like I've already said, he's kind of laid down the law, you might say, and he's come out and made this blatant statement to them and basically told them how it's going to be, and he didn't want any feedback. He didn't want to get any lip from them, so to speak, and he just wanted to let them know what was going on, and that was going to be the end of it. So it's kind of like, it almost indicates that he might have been treating them almost as a possession, rather than the helpmeet that they were, and rather than, and we're speculating a little bit here, but that's kind of the indication it gives, is that, rather than loving and cherishing and honoring them as he should, that perhaps he was, just becoming the kind of like the taskmaster, you might say. He says, hear my voice. And why? Because of how he addresses them. He says, ye wives of Lamech. He doesn't call them by their names. He doesn't address them as, honey or sweetheart. But he says, ye wives of Lamech. And what was his announcement? That he has slain a man. And I think most of us could only imagine what that would be like, to be in a house with your mate, and your mate comes home one day and has an announcement to make to you and tells you that they've killed somebody. I mean, that would just be a horrible thing to hear, but it would also be something we would want to inquire about. Well, what happened? Was it in self-defense? Was it, somebody after you? Were they trying to hurt you? Or, hopefully it was, just trying to protect yourself. But in his case, he says, well, first of all, we see that it is another recorded barbarous act of murder and killing another human being. And what was the cause of the incident? It was a man to his wounding and a young man to his hurt. So it was a younger individual. And what was the crime? Well, the man had brought some sort of pain or affliction upon Lamech. Now, we don't know exactly what that was. Was it physical? Was it financial? Was it emotional? Or whatever. We just don't know. But whatever it was, he felt strongly enough about it that, he rose back against him and he ended up killing him. And, Lamech had counted it worthy of his death. And this is how he would justify it, that it was the result of what this man had done unto him. But again, we're not shown the, was it a fact of self-preservation? Was it a fact of, that he was defending himself? Or was it a fact that he just got angry about something that was done to him, and so he rose up and fought back? So, perhaps his wives were now in fear for reprisals against Lamech from, possibly the young man's friends or family. And obviously, they knew the account of Cain, and they heard the account of how God had put his badge of protection on him, and he even gave a stark warning that if somebody was to harm Cain or take Cain's life, that, the judgment and curse would come upon them 7 times worse than what Cain had pronounced on, that God had pronounced on him. And so obviously they'd heard this account of great-grandpa Cain and how he had done this very thing and was protected by God from the revenge seekers that would be out there. And so thusly Lamech just assumes the same will apply to him. In fact, he makes a comparison and a correlation. He says, well, if Cain was going to be avenged 7-fold, then surely Lamech will be 70 and 7-fold, because I didn't commit as bad of a crime as Cain. I didn't, do all of the things that he did. And so my protection should be even more bold from God. But the glaring difference here was that Cain's badge of protection was issued by God. And, but just by making this analysis, Lamech's assuming that he's going to be under the same protection. I mean, it's just an erroneous statement to make. And so here he feels that, he would get out and about and folks might take it to heart, but that he would be protected. And, the people today, they think they can live like the devil, they can live like the world, they can not even give God the time of day, let alone probably not being saved, and yet that they're, still counting on God to give them protection. And, a lot of times when that'll show up is if they're in a state of peril. They find themselves in some sort of danger or dangerous situation, and all of a sudden they become very spiritual. All of a sudden they are crying out unto God. And, never had a thought one time in their life about ever tipping their hat to the Lord. But now all of a sudden they want God's, hedge of protection about them because of some situation they're in, or maybe of something they've done. And so that's where Cain has found himself, Lamech has found himself here. And so basically he's just throwing out this threat, and he says, he's saying, I dare anyone to take odds up with me. They'll be sorry if they do. I'll slay them as well. And basically, since God protected Cain, he's going to protect me as well, and he's going to give me the ability to, lash back at them as well. And so if God provided for the safety of Cain, much more for mine. At least I didn't slay my own brother, so it wasn't as bad as what Cain did, so surely I'll be even more protected. And so, that's the way he saw it. And this is basically, it was just an abuse of power and freedom. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 11, the Bible says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. And so we're going to think about that verse and give that some consideration. And we're going to pick it up in verse 25 and 26 of chapter 4 in our next lesson. And so in our next lesson we're going to see another son, maybe a replacement, if you will, for Abel is going to take place for Adam and Eve. And we're going to see the birth of Seth. And we're going to see a little bit of a different lineage taking place and given to us in that account. But think about that verse again, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Well, we'll leave it off there for today. I hope you guys are having a great day. We look forward to seeing you in our next lesson. Hang in there with us. And we're just about to finish chapter 4, and I think in our next lesson we just may do it. And we'll see you then.